All right, let me read something to you I saw online the other day, and I quote, "You've made $30 million of taxable income. Uncle Sam is taking $11 million, but wait, buy a $20 million jet, deduct it, and now Uncle Sam only gets $3.7 million. Better yet, finance the jet, put $3 million down, and you've turned a tax bill into a jet. Congratulations, you've saved $4.3 million in cash, and you have it to reinvest in your business or spend on a fireworks emoji," end quote. Fireworks? Seriously? Buy a $20 million jet, and your big plan is to blow the savings on bottle rockets. That's where we are. This is the kind of sales pitch that makes aircraft sound like they're free. It's really neat math. It makes for a catchy LinkedIn post, and it gets a lot of likes from people who don't understand how taxes or aircraft ownership actually work. Welcome back to The Truth About the Market. I'm your host, Jason Zilberbrand, and I'm president of VREF. I'm a longtime aviation appraiser and someone who has spent over 3 decades deep inside this industry. I have worked with everybody from high net worth individuals to Fortune 50 flight departments, and I've testified as an expert witness in major litigation and seen more market cycles than I can count. This podcast is about cutting through the BS. No fluff, no marketing spin, just a straight, unfiltered truth about aviation, aircraft values, and the industry trends that actually matter. And today we're going to pull apart 2 of those biggest myths distorting aircraft buying decisions. First, the so-called magic of bonus depreciation, the idea that the government is basically going to pay for your airplane. And second, that the aircraft popularity contest, why it rules and why people still buy the wrong aircraft instead of buying what actually fits their mission and their budget. So let's talk about what bonus depreciation actually is. In theory, it lets you write off 100% of the cost of a qualifying asset in year 1. And so yes, an aircraft is a qualifying aircraft or a qualifying asset. So in this example, let's use the $25 million business jet. So if you take a $25 million deduction right away, chances are you're in a 42% combined tax bracket. So that's about $10.5 million in tax savings on paper. And it sounds great, but here's the reality. 1, it's not free cash. You don't get a check from the IRS. You only save that money if you had the $25 million of taxable income to start with, and it's got to be in the same year. So if you only made $5 million, you can only use $5 million of the deduction. The rest, you can carry it forward. Now, the so-called miracle is just a slow drip over years, and honestly, it already exists. And this is really a big myth, but you can depreciate over 5 or 7 years, and that's makers. So now let's say you're going to finance this aircraft, and most buyers do, and most buyers of a $25 million aircraft would. So let's just say you get lucky and you put 20% down. On that $25 million airplane, that's $5 million, and you're going to borrow the rest. That's debt service. That's interest. That's cash going out the door, and you haven't even operated it yet. So let's not forget operating costs. A large, brand new $25 million aircraft could cost you $2 to $3 million a year to fly it, but nobody in any of these social media posts ever mention operating costs. And then let's talk about the kicker. The kicker is called recapture, and recapture occurs upon resale. And if you sell that plane in 5 years, and let's say you sell it for $20 million, you already depreciated it to 0. So the IRS calls that recapture, and you're taxed on the gain as ordinary income, and at a 42% tax bracket, that's an $8.4 million tax bill. So the IRS isn't dumb. There's one thing you can count on. They're going to get their piece. Uncle Sam always does. So now let's look at the real math, because this free jet's not free all of a sudden. Here's the real math on the $25 million jet. You buy it for $25. You do a $25 million deduction. You have $10.5 million of paper tax savings with a net effective cost at $14.5 plus $2 to $3 million a year to operate, with a resale of $20 million and an $8.4 million recapture. So no, the jet isn't free. It's not even close to free. Bonus depreciation is a timing tool. It's not a permanent elimination of tax. And for 99% of the buyers, it never works the way any broker pitches it. And if you don't believe me, call your CPA, call your accountant. Because the only people who really get to use it effectively were Fortune 500 companies, private equity funds, and the ultra high net worth. These individuals and companies have huge balance sheets and predictable taxable income. So if you're one of those people and you're listening to this podcast, first, thank you very much. And secondly, congrats, you're one of the 10% that can actually use this tax rule. So what we're really focusing in on this conversation is how to choose the right aircraft, not just the one that you think is a smart buy because of Google or because of Instagram or because you see people all over the internet taking pictures inside of it. You know, there's something that a lot of people, when they set out to buy an airplane, they forget the obvious. And the obvious is you have to service it, you have to maintain it, you have to crew it, you have to keep it supported. And aircraft ownership doesn't stop at the bill of sale. You know, that's just the beginning. And if you buy an airplane and you buy too big of an aircraft or you buy too old of an aircraft, everything's very attractive up front, but in the long run, it's a huge costly mistake. And a lot of people don't think about this, but, you know, if you buy a 30-year-old airplane that has 30-year-old parts support with a dwindling fleet and not a lot of aircraft out there in operation, chances are it's going to cost you way more to operate than you think or that anybody can even advise you on. And there's a lot of challenges when you start operating older aircraft. Most of the OEMs don't support them. So now you're left to the second and third tier, you know, of a support network. And maintenance is critical, especially today. You know, and so the smart move is to pick an aircraft with a strong support network. You want to be able to buy an aircraft that has a strong upgrade path, that has a lot of STCs out there, especially avionics. Because there's one thing that's the kiss of death for an aging aircraft, and that is the cockpit. Once the cockpit's useful life is over, so is the aircraft. It becomes very problematic to continue to resell airplanes that have very few STC supports, or that doesn't have the freedom of the aftermarket to put in an integrated panel. And so the problem is that a lot of people don't buy with that in mind. They choose airplanes the way that teenagers choose sneakers. They buy what's hot, what looks cool, what their buddy has, what they see on TV, what they see in the movies. And they also tend to, and this isn't everyone, but I do see a lot of folks buy too much aircraft for the wrong missions. You know, as an example, the executive flying in a 2-hour leg to go, from New York to Chicago in a long-range, ultra-long-range aircraft. It's just not the right aircraft for them. It's not the right tool, but it's the popular one. And I've seen a bunch of big companies over the years in their flight departments either get unfortunately shut down or aircraft and the decisions of which aircraft to buy get removed from the people who are doing it because they buy too big of an airplane and they have too few people flying on it. And this really is, that it's the myth about business jet ownership and Instagram glamour and the fact that there's, champagne on all the tarmacs and ramp selfies and hashtags about private jet life and, we call it the Gulfstream glow. The hype here, it's all BS. Here's the reality. The people that are taking these pictures and putting these images on Instagram and talking about how many aircraft they're selling and everything that's going on the internet, first of all, they're probably chartering it. They don't own it. And second of all, those that actually do own these airplanes and operate these aircraft keep a very low profile. They avoid attention like the plague. They do not seek it out. And so I find it very interesting that a lot of the stuff that goes on the internet and social media, a lot of buyers think that it's reality. But in fact, it mirrors the old Japanese superstition against openly showing wealth. I find that a lot of high net worth individuals today are very aware of this superstition. Flaunting what you have invites bad luck. In aviation, it's the same. The louder someone is about their private jet lifestyle, the less likely they actually own the jet. And you got to remember, people don't want you to know where they're flying to. They don't want you to know who's on board. There's a reason why it's called a private aircraft. And so I think what matters is that you buy the right airplane for your mission and for your budget. And the problem is that buyers often let the economics take a back seat. They ignore what's most important. Instead, they focus on image and hype instead of the cost of ownership and where they're going and with how many people. And as a result, a perfectly capable aircraft gets overlooked. And if you think about it, with a piston or a single or a twin or turboprops, a lot of these aircraft for a lot of these missions, in some cases, maybe turboprops can do 80% of what a jet can do at a fraction of the cost. Or a mid-cabin aircraft can do what an ultra-long-range aircraft can do, unless we're really talking about flying internationally. And the same holds true for helicopters, and the same holds true for single-engine turboprops. These are all proven platforms. They have deep support networks, but they get ignored because they're not sexy enough, or they're not expensive enough. They don't produce enough commission. Whatever the case may be, you don't typically see twin-engine turboprops like King Airs, and you typically don't see TBM 700s and PC-12s being spewed all over Instagram with photos of them because they're not very impressive. They're not business jets. But the smart operator, the smart purchaser, they're not going to overlook these types of models if they meet both their mission and fall within their budget. So remember, when you start shopping in the long-range new production cabin class, if you're one of those lucky few and you really are looking to buy an ultra-long-range aircraft, remember you're not competing against other individual buyers. Actually, very, very few of those aircraft get sold to high net worth individuals, or even to, unfortunately, the Fortune 500's gotten pretty small. A lot of those flight departments are gone, but a lot of those don't get sold to them either. You know where they get sold? They get sold to NetJets. They get sold to FlexJet. They get sold to VistaJet. They get sold to Wheels Up. They get sold to all of these operators that have deep pockets with large fleets, far stronger negotiating leverage, and they're going to get the inventory and they're going to get the deals, and you're not. You're going to get the leftovers. And eventually, these brand new aircraft become 5 or 7 or 10 years old, and they get cycled out. And so you've got to be careful that you're not playing in a market where you truly are the minority owner, because the values can collapse very quickly. We have seen this time and time again where a fractional operator controls the vast majority of a fleet. They cycle them out and they're sold for peanuts on the resale market. You got to remember, the house always wins here. So what do we do about bonus depreciation hype and the popularity contest? And more importantly, what do they have in common? Well, A, they both distort reality. They both lead buyers to make bad decisions, right? One is what I would call tax code sleight of hand, and it often gets oversold as free money. And the other is herd mentality. It's chasing what's cool instead of what makes sense. And those people always get burned. The golden rule in aviation: never buy more than you can afford to. Keep in mind the first 6 months of ownership is a honeymoon. And I don't think anybody ever really talks about this. This could possibly be an episode all in of itself. But I remember the first time I bought an airplane for personal use. I had more friends than I could shake a stick at overnight. It was unbelievable how many people all of a sudden wanted to be my best friend. And that lasted about 6 months until I realized what was going on, and the excitement wears off. More importantly, the bills start coming in. And let me tell you, they come in and they don't stop. There is no schedule to when an airplane breaks unless you really fall, or follow Murphy's Law. And I think that's because Murphy's Law in aviation, I've said this before, they go hand in hand. My airplane would break on Christmas Eve. It would break on Thanksgiving. The windshield will go bad when I was, a 45-minute flight from home, but it would turn out to be a 6-hour drive, and it winds up, stranding you in the middle of nowhere. These things happen. It's very real. So, buy an airplane that is within your budget. More importantly, make sure that you really are, what you're signing up for. You can't hide your wealth when you show up and you have a big fancy aircraft on the ramp. And I think for a lot of folks, they don't really anticipate the attention that it's going to bring. So my advice is, jets are tools. And that's the truth. They're tools. They're not free. They're very expensive. They're not trophies. They're really there to make your life easier, but you're going to pay for it. So the right aircraft is the one that matches your mission, your budget, and your operating profile, and not the one that gets you the most likes on LinkedIn or the biggest possible tax write-off in year one. That's it for episode 2 of The Truth About the Market. We debunked the free jet myth. We called out the aircraft popularity contest, and hopefully I gave you a little perspective on how these forces really shape the industry. Don't buy into the hype. Do the math, ask the hard questions, and pick the aircraft that actually works for you. I am Jason Zilberbrand. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.